Today, we are diving headfirst into the absolutely massive world of moral philosophy. And, we're not going to start with some dry textbook. No, we're going to start with a single, seemingly impossible choice.
So let's get right into it with one of the most famous ethical puzzles in all of pop culture. We're talking about the Joker's dilemma. It's a question that puts two of the most iconic characters ever created against each other, and it forces us to grapple with some really tough ideas about what's right and what's wrong.
Now hold on, this isn't just a fun question for comic book nerds. This exact problem, sacrificing one life to save many, it's a classic dilemma. It's something moral philosophy has been wrestling with for centuries. I'm sure you have a gut reaction right now, right? But let's see if we can build a more structured way to think about it.
Yeah, so to even begin to help Batman out, we're going to need a map, a kind of toolkit for thinking clearly about what makes an action right or wrong. And lucky for us, philosophers have been drawing this exact map for a very, very long time. I want you to think of these as four totally different lenses you can use to look at any ethical problem. See, each one asks a fundamentally different kind of question, and that gives us a way richer understanding of what's really at stake. So here are our four big branches. We've got meta-ethics, normative ethics, descriptive ethics, and applied ethics. And they kind of move from the super abstract, the big picture theoretical stuff, all the way down to the nitty-gritty of real-world problems. Let's break them down one by one. First up, we have meta-ethics. Okay, this is the really big picture stuff. Before we can even ask if killing the Joker is good, meta-ethics stops us and asks, whoa, hold on. What do we even mean by good? Where does that concept even come from? Is it a real universal truth, or is it just an opinion? Honestly, this is the root of so many of our deepest disagreements. And this leads us to the central debate in meta-ethics. It's really cool. On one side, you've got moral realists. They believe that a statement like, murder is wrong, is an objective fact, just as true or false as saying the sky is blue. But on the other side, you have moral anti-realists. They argue that no, these are just human inventions, expressions of our emotions, or maybe just rules cooked up by our culture. All right, next up is normative ethics. So if meta-ethics asks, what is good? Normative ethics asks, how can we be good? This is the branch that tries to give us a practical framework, a set of principles or rules to guide our actions. This is where we're going to find the tools Batman really needs. Then there's descriptive ethics, and this one's totally different. It's not about what should be, it's about what is. Think of it like a sociologist or an anthropologist studying a culture. They aren't there to judge if a society's moral code is right or wrong. They're just observing and reporting on what that group of people actually believes and how they behave. And finally, we get to applied ethics. This is where the philosophical rubber really hits the road. It takes all those theories from normative ethics and applies them to messy, real-world controversies. I mean, every time you see a headline about the ethics of AI, or self-driving cars, or gene editing, yep, that's applied ethics in action. Okay, so let's zoom in on normative ethics, because remember, this is the branch that's going to give Batman the actual tools he needs to deal with the Joker. This is where we find the three main engines for making a moral decision. Now, these three approaches, they don't just offer different answers. They ask fundamentally different questions about what we should even be focusing on when we make a choice. Should we focus on the consequences, the action itself, or maybe the person making the choice? So first, we have consequentialism. For a consequentialist, the only thing that really matters is the result. Simple. An action is good if it leads to a good outcome. And the most famous version of this, utilitarianism, is basically all about the math. Figure out which action creates the most happiness for the most people, and boom, that's your moral duty. For them, the ends absolutely can justify the means. Next up, deontology. And this is basically the polar opposite. A deontologist would argue that the consequences are totally irrelevant. Morality is about following universal rules and duties. Certain actions, like killing or lying, are just plain wrong, period. You have a duty not to do them, and there are no exceptions and no calculations. And our third approach is virtue ethics. Now, this one shifts the focus completely. It's not about the consequences of a single action, and it's not about the rules you follow. It's about you. It asks, what kind of person are you trying to become? The right thing to do is whatever a virtuous person, someone who's brave and honest and just, would do in that exact same situation. Okay, so this is the crucial point. We now have our three distinct ethical tools. So let's pull them out of the toolbox and apply them directly to Batman's impossible choice. What should he actually do about the Joker? And this just perfectly illustrates the conflict, doesn't it? A utilitarian looks at the math and says, kill the Joker. It's one life to save thousands. It's not even a close call. But then the deontologist steps in and says, absolutely not. The rule is do not kill. You cannot break a universal moral law no matter how good the outcome might be. And then the virtue ethicist asks Batman a totally different question. What kind of person are you trying to be? Does a hero, a protector, become a killer? Is that who you are?
So, what's the answer? Well, here's the thing. Moral philosophy doesn't give us one. Instead, what it does is give us the tools to understand why this is such a hard question in the first place. It shows us that the right answer depends entirely on which framework you decide to prioritize. It gives us a structured way to find our own answer.
Okay, but why does any of this actually matter outside of a comic book page? I mean, really, why should we care about all these abstract ideas in our everyday lives? Because these questions, they are not just for superheroes. These frameworks and the debates between them, they are the very foundation of how we all live together. You can think of them as the invisible architecture holding up our laws, our institutions, and even our personal relationships. On a personal level, just consciously thinking about this stuff is how we build our own identity, right? Are you the person who tells a little white lie to protect a friend's feelings? Or are you the person who believes that honesty is always the #1 rule? This is how we actually forge our own character, and it's what helps us make those tough calls when there's no easy answer. And for society, it's everything. A shared set of ethics is what creates the trust that allows us to cooperate in these massive communities. It forms the basis for our entire system of justice. And really, it's the only tool we have to navigate huge, complex issues like human rights, bioethics, and even the justifications for going to war.
And really, that's the main takeaway here. We started with Batman, but the real question is about us. When you have to make a difficult choice, are you calculating the consequences? Are you following a hard and fast rule? Or are you thinking about the kind of person you want to become? Because these aren't just theories. They're the operating systems we use to make decisions every single day.